Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. Halacha 5, where we're talking about Revai. Now, just keep in mind, we have a requirement in the Torah to guard the commandments. And, part of guarding the commandments is learning about the commandments, and there's a lot of details. And Revai is something that's mandated by the Torah. It's one of the 613 mitzvot. You can't get rid of mitzvot. You have to do them, know about them, and learn about them. So part of this is trying to understand how does this halacha work? It's Torah mandated, and how do we derive it? How do we understand it in terms of the Shemitah year? How do we understand it in terms of deconsecration and in terms of all these other issues going on here? Now, I want to point out, just so that you can keep it clear, that there's really a couple of things going on here, okay? Beit Shammai comes and says an opinion, okay? And you have basically three people trying to understand what is Beit Shammai saying. Rebbe is saying one opinion, okay? Basically, what Rebbe is saying that, he pointed out that, in the Shemitah year, if the fourth year of the grapevine happens in the Shemitah year, then the fourth year fruit is going to be subject to a requirement of adding a fifth, and also to Beur, which is the disposal. Okay, now he's basically saying that he's trying to the Rebbe's understanding of what Beit Shammai is trying to say and rule is that look, the Revai that grew in the Shemitah year is exempt from the laws of fifth and disposal, and he's linking that and how he understands that with a gezerah shava between Meiser Sheni and Revai. Okay, and he's connecting over here holy and over here holy. There's two verses where it says, and in the fourth year, all its fruit shall be sanctified with praises to Hashem, with regard to Meiser Sheni, the verse states, any tithe of the seed of the land, of the fruit of the tree, it is for Hashem, it is holy to Hashem. So the word over here, holy, and the word over here for Meiser Sheni, holy, is going to connect these two. And based on this analogy, Rebbe is going to say that Beit Shammai is saying that the law of Revai is like Meiser Sheni. And just like for Meiser Sheni, it's going to be subject to the law for adding a fifth and also disposal. The same thing applies there. Then you're going to have a second opinion of what they're trying to say. And Rabban Gamliel is basically going to be saying that, no, really what Beit Shammai is trying to say is that Beit Shammai understands it with the analogy between the verse over here for Revai and the verse over here for Beurim. And so that changes the law for the adding the fifth and also for the disposal. It's gonna change it. Then you have the opinion of Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel is saying that the way it works is, yes, there is a gezerah shava, okay, and the gezerah shava, by the way, there's no dispute on what Beit Hillel is saying. Okay, what these three opinions are trying to do is they're trying to figure out what Beit Shammai is saying. They're not saying that they agree with Beit Shammai, okay, and you shouldn't read that way either. There's really, the way to read this is to say, what we're trying to sit here and figure out, what is it exactly that Beit Shammai is arguing here with this baraisa? How are we supposed to interpret it? What exactly do they mean? So these people like Rebbe or Shimon Gamliel, they're not saying that that's their opinion. They're saying that this is my understanding of what Beit Shammai is saying. Now, there's no dispute on Beit Hillel, what Beit Hillel is saying. Everybody agrees that Bet Hillel is saying, yes, there's a Gezerah Shava of holy and holy that equates Meiser Sheni and Revai, but Bet Hillel is saying that when this Gezerah Shava was transmitted, it was transmitted at Har Sinai, and it was intended only to extend to Revai some of the stringencies of Meiser Sheni, like the requirement of adding a fifth and its disposal. But it was not intended to extend to Revai the leniencies of Meiser Sheni, like this Shemitah exemption. Now, in Rebbe's understanding, he's saying that Beit Shammai is saying that there is a Gezerah Shava between these two, and it's going to be because there's a Gezerah Shava, there's a leniency here with regards to disposal of this on the Shemitah year. Okay, if this fourth year happens on here, then if this fourth year happens on the Shemitah year, then there's going to be a leniency, just like you have a leniency over on Meiser Sheni, all the leniencies for Meiser Sheni, because this and this are connected with Gezerah Shava, therefore you're going to have a leniency. Now, I said in the first shiur that I thought that Bet Hillel would agree with that, and upon rereading it, Bet Hillel would not agree with that, okay? Bet Hillel is saying that the only leniency that comes, okay, is because we have a Gezerah Shava that comes from the fifth and the disposal, and that is from Halacha L'Moshe L'Sinai. And yes, they also accept that we know about this from this Gezerah Shava, but the twist and the wrinkle of Bet Hillel is to say, hey, wait, because we have this tradition that it comes from Har Sinai, and in this tradition, it's meaning that there are no Meiser Sheni exemptions like the Shemitah exemption. And that is why Beit Shammai starts off by putting in, if this happens, if this Revai lands on the Shemitah year. Really, by putting it in, by landing on the Shemitah year, that's the only way that you can test whether it's gonna have the leniencies of Meiser Sheni or not. And Bet Shammai is saying it will, and Bet Hillel is saying it's not. And the reason it's not is because, yes, there is a Gezerah Shava, we accept your Gezerah Shava, but it's only to teach the fifth and the disposal, but this extra knowledge that we have comes from Har Sinai, and this tradition that's been handed down, and the leniency part of Meiser Sheni, that part, that's not included, okay? Then you're going to have this other opinion, okay? So we looked at this opinion of, connecting between the holiness area, and then we're looking at also connecting with Revai, and like where it's talking about the songs of praise, and like Hallel, and there's a connection between Hallel over here with Revai, and Hallel is also mentioned in Beurim, where you're reciting praise. So you're talking about, these songs of praise over here, and these reciting of praises over here, and there's this other opinion that actually what Bet Shammai is talking about, and the way they're proving it, is with this connection of Beurim. Now, today we're going to get into what is this third opinion. This third opinion about what Bet Shammai is going to be the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael is going to be proving it another way. Again, keep in mind, we're trying to figure out what is Bet Shammai saying, and how are they deriving it. We know how Bet Hillel derives it, no dispute, but we're unclear how to understand how Bet Shammai is, because they quoted these baraisas, but it's not clear. There's three different ways to interpret it, and we're trying to figure out which is which. Okay, and so again, you have to keep in mind, these people are not necessarily saying that they agree with Bet Shammai, and that's their opinion, But what they're trying to do is they're trying to give a proof on how does Beit Shammai derive it, and where are they getting it from, and that's where the dispute is. Okay, they're disputing how Beit Shammai rules on it, how they prove it, but they're not saying that that's also their own opinion. So very important to keep in mind. So we're going to continue, and now the Gemara is going to get back to this baraisa that Rebbe's view of the dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and the baraisa is now going to get, is going to have this, other view of the dispute. Okay, so here's what the Gemara says. The rabbis taught in a baraisa, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, both during the Shemitah year and during the other years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, Beit Shammai says, fourth year fruit is not subject to the law of adding a fifth, and is not subject to the law of disposal. That's Beur. So basically, okay, what Shimon Gamliel, according to what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying, is Beit Shammai's ruling is not limited to Revai of the Shemitah year. And, as a general rule, it's stated, with regard to Revai of really each and every year. Okay, so the Gemara is going to explain Beit Shammai's reasoning according to Rabban Shimon Gamliel, right? So how is he reading and understanding this? Okay, so in the view of this baraisa, again, this is based on Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Beit Shammai did not derive the law of a fourth year sapling from the law of Meiser Sheni altogether. In other words, what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying is that Beit Shammai does not accept this scriptural analogy, this Gezer Shava that equates it to. Rather, he's saying that this analogy he's saying that since this analogy is the only possible source to obligate Revai in an added fifth and disposal, Beit Shammai, who rejects this analogy, lacks any source whatsoever for these obligations, and therefore they're ruling that the fourth year fruit is never subject to these requirements. So that seems very, very surprising. But in the Bavli, in Kiddushin 54b, when you look at the commentary by the Rosh, that seems basically to be where they're going to accept Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's view of this. Okay, that's the view they're going to accept. So basically, just to break this down, according to what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying, he's saying Beit Shammai says and holds that we do not explain the Gezer Shava of holy and holy to compare Meiser Sheni and Revai. Therefore, Revai is never subject to the laws of an added fifth and disposal. Now, keep in mind, Beit Hillel, however, does say that we do explain this Gezer Shava, and that it is teaching that Revai, like Meiser Sheni, is subject to the requirements of a fifth and disposal. Now, it's going to go by Beit Hillel. We're just really unclear about what on earth is Beit Shammai saying here. So you have these great men sitting there arguing to understand what exactly is the point of Beit Shammai. It's unclear. So they're trying to clarify it for us. So the Gemara is going to object to this idea that Beit Shammai does not accept an analogy between Revai and Meiser Sheni, like what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is basically stating. Okay, he's saying that the Gemara says, now, if that is so, then Revai fruit should have no sanctity whatsoever. So Mara Fulda is saying like this. He's saying, that is to say that there should be no requirement to take Revai to Jerusalem to be consumed, or to be redeemed before consuming it outside of Jerusalem. For these requirements derive from the sanctity of Revai, and without the comparison to Meiser Sheni, there's no source for such sanctity. So they're saying that, hey, if you're going to take away this interpretation of a Gezer Shava, and you're going to take away Beit Shammai's link, saying that there's a Gezer Shava for it, then why are you talking about a fifth or taking it to Jerusalem at all to eat it? Because it would have no sanctity. There would be no point to bring it to Jerusalem. Why are you bringing it to Jerusalem if it doesn't have any sanctity? So, they're saying that, on some level, you could say, well, maybe there's a dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai about how much sanctity it has, right? And so Beit Hillel would say that it has a little bit of sanctity, right? But it doesn't have the leniencies of Meiser Sheni. In other words, Meiser Sheni would have more sanctity, but Revai would have some sanctity as well. And Beit Shammai, if you left this Gezerah Shava in there, would say, yes, there's sanctity in there, and also are included the leniencies of Meiser Sheni. Okay, but now if you're going to do how Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is going to try to interpret it, the counter to that is to say, well, wait a second, why do you have to bring it to Jerusalem at all? Because it doesn't have any sanctity. What's the point of that? So basically, without the comparison to Meiser Sheni, there's really no source for sanctity. And, that can't really be true because we see that Beit Shammai does assign sanctity to Revai. And so, it must be that, they are also deriving the law of Revai from Meiser Sheni. At least that's what it seems. That's, really what it looks like. Now, Mara Fulda is pointing out that, we see in this Mishnah that that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is quoting that, Beit Shammai states only that Revai is not subject to an added fifth or disposal. They do not say, however, that Revai is entirely without sanctity and need not be brought to Jerusalem. And this implies that even Beit Shammai agrees that Revai is sanctified and must be brought to Jerusalem and consumed. So that's another way to question it. So the Gemara is going to explain that there is in fact a different source for the sanctity of Revai fruit, and here's how the Gemara is linking it. It says, "But they, Beit Shammai, derived the sanctity of Revai from a verse that is stated with regard to Revai itself." The Gemara continues and it says, "For the Torah described Revai as sanctified for songs of praise to Hashem. And this teaches that the fruit of the fourth year is like that form of sanctified food over which we praise to Hashem, namely Beurim." So basically, he's coming back to say, no, they're not getting this proof from this Gezerah Shava between Meiser Sheni and Revai. In fact, that doesn't exist at all. Really, they're getting it from songs of praise, and it has sanctity, says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and we know that it has sanctity from this Gezerah Shava between Revai and Beurim, but that the sanctity itself is only coming from there, and that the laws and understanding are not coming from this Gezerah Shava between Revai and Meiser Sheni, says this one interpretation of how Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is reading and trying to understand that. So, from this analogy between Revai and Beurim, we're learning that Beurim is sanctified and that's brought to Jerusalem, and so to here, is Revai, and the sanctity of Revai is deriving from this teaching. So this comparison, basically, to Meiser Sheni is not needed. That's really what it's arguing. So the Gemara is going to object to the idea that Beit Shammai rejects the analogy between Revai and Meiser Sheni. And the Gemara says, but if so, the fourth year fruit should be permitted to an onen. That's somebody who's in mourning. So the source to prohibit Revai to an onen is the comparison to Meiser Sheni. So if Beit Shammai is basically going to be rejecting the comparison to Meiser Sheni, then they should also reject having an onen be able to eat it. And if Beit Shammai rejects this comparison, they must also reject the onen as well. And since Beit Shammai they do in fact recognize this prohibition, it's clear they must accept this comparison to Meiser Sheni. They say that an onan is not allowed to eat it, and we can see that the fact that Beit Shammai disputes Beit Hillel only with regards to an added fifth and disposal, but not with regards to the law of an onan, and they're certainly not disputing Beit Hillel with regards to whether this has sanctity or not. They're only claiming, according to this one interpretation, that there's a dispute on adding a fifth. If you can't eat it now, let's say you're growing the fruit up in Tiberias and you can't make it down to Jerusalem to eat it, you're allowed to deconsecrate it, and then let's say you're not going to use it at all, then you have to add a fifth to it. So, and then there's also Beur and the disposal. So, but there's no dispute on other points of it. Okay. So, the Gemara is going to explain that Beit Shammai is going to derive the prohibition of Revai to an onan from actually another source. So, here's how Rabban Shimon Gamliel is going to counter that about Revai. They're saying that no, it's still not going to be connected with this Gezer Shava at all between Revai and Meiser Sheni, and that point about Revai and onan is going to be somewhere else. They're saying that this point about songs of praise is going to connect holiness and taking it to Jerusalem for Beurim, and the onan will be somewhere else. Okay, so here's what the Gemara says. It says that they taught in a baraisa, the verse states regarding Revai, sanctified for songs of praise to Hashem, and this tells us that fruit on the fourth year is forbidden to an onan. So the Gemara is going to state that Beit Shammai derives the sanctity of Revai from Beurim, and now the Gemara is going to question that. So basically, what they're saying onan, they're saying, look, because Revai has sanctified for songs of praise, that you can't basically be doing this. You can't be doing this as an onan. So where is their proof coming from? They're not taking their proof from another scriptural analogy. They're not taking it from a Gezer Shava from Beurim. They're not taking from a Gezer Shava anywhere else. What they're doing is they're saying, no, look in the actual verse in the Torah on Revai itself. And the verse, Revai itself, says sanctified for songs of praise. And that means, they say, that it means it is forbidden to an onan. So they're saying that, the only place you need to look for understanding that you take it to Jerusalem and for sanctity is with Beurim. But if you want to know the law of onan, you don't need a Gezer Shava for that. You look in the verse itself, and that there is clear that an onan can't eat it, because an onan is not allowed to sit there and do happy, joyous songs of praise, and not, can't do halal, because you have to be in a state of happiness. So now the Gemara is going to state that Beit Shammai is going to derive the sanctity of Revai from Beurim, and now it did say that. Now the Gemara is going to question this. Now they're going to question this by the statement by Rabban Shimon Gamliel. Here's what it says. It says, but if the fourth year fruit is analogous to Beurim, it should be subject to the law of disposal, just as Beurim is subject to this law. So basically what it's saying is saying, look, Beit Shammai rules in the Mishnah that Revai is not subject to disposal. So this would imply that Beit Shammai does not really draw an analogy at all between Beurim and Revai. That's really what it's saying and claiming. So the Gemara is going to explain why Beit Shammai does not learn from Beurim that Revai is subject to the law of disposal. The Gemara says it is because Rabbi Shimon exempts Beurim from the law of disposal, and Beit Shammai concurs with this view. In other words, since Beurim itself is not subject to the law of disposal, it cannot serve as a source to teach this law with regards to Revai. And now, of course, the Gemara is going to question this notion that Beit Shammai does not accept this analogy between Revai and Meiser Sheni. Okay? So the Gemara now questions and says, but if so, the fruit of the fourth year should be able to be redeemed even while attached to the ground. In other words, it's saying that, it's going to get back to this Sefeda and a baraisa in Meiser Sheni, chapter 5, Halacha 11, which is going to talk about, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agrees that Revai fruit may not be redeemed while it's attached to the ground. So then how could this be? Let's look at the Vilna Gaon's explanation for what's going on here. The Vilna Gaon says like this. He says that the question is bolstered by the fact that Beurim became sanctified while it's still attached. And one could reasonably argue that since Revai is compared to Beurim, it too should be sanctified and thus subject to redemption while attached. And it emerges that not only is there no source to prohibit the redemption of attached Revai, there is even some reason to allow it. So perhaps it's more like Beurim than we thought. So the Gemara is gonna pose a question, because that's going to make a big departure on if Beit Shammai is going to be not connecting it with Meiser Sheni. So the Gemara posed an inquiry. Rabbi Zera inquired before Rabbi Abahu and says, from where do we know that according to Beit Shammai, that fruit of the fourth year requires deconsecration upon coins if it is to be eaten outside of Jerusalem? So here's how the Vilna Gaon is going to be talking about it. Okay, let's go look at what Beit Hillel says, right? Because that's going to make it easier to understand what they're saying, perhaps what Beit Shammai is saying. Okay, so Vilna Gaon says like this about Beit Hillel. Okay, it says according to Beit Hillel, who does expound the Gezerah Shava between Revai and Meiser Sheni, and who make no differentiation between Revai of ordinary years and that of the Shemitah year, there is a clear source for redemption and deconsecration of Revai, namely the law of Meiser Sheni. So it follows that, Rabbi Zera's inquiry was not stated according to Beit Hillel. So let me read this Gemara again. So here's this question. Rabbi Zera inquired before Rabbi Bahu, from where do we know, according to Beit Shammai, that fruit of the fourth year requires deconsecration upon coins if it is to be eaten outside of Jerusalem? So, real quick to try to understand it, and here's what the Vilna Gaon says about Beit Shammai. They're saying that if a person does not wish to take his Revai fruit to be consumed in Jerusalem, he may redeem it. He may redeem the fruit with coins, thereby deconsecrating and eating it outside Jerusalem. The coins are then brought up to Jerusalem and used to purchase food, which is eaten there. Rabbi Zera is now seeking the source for the consecration of Revai. And Rabbi Zera's inquiry is stated according to the view that does not derive the deconsecration of Revai from the Gezerah Shava between Revai and Meiser Sheni. That's to say, according to the view of Beit Shammai. And the inquiry, applies, both to the understanding of Rebbe and according to the understanding of Rabban Shimon Gamliel's understanding of what Beit Shammai's ruling would be. So, there's going to be, some question as to, the point of Rabbi Zera's questioning. So, we could read it one way, where we could say that Rabbi Zera's concern is to find a source for this basic essential sanctity of Revai, which is underlying this requirement for deconsecration. Again, you don't have to worry about deconsecration for things that are not having any kind of holiness, right? So there's that issue, and then then there's this. There's this other way to read. Rabbi Zera. In other words, Rabbi Zera is asking, his point here is not to find the source of sanctity of Revai, which is which could be derived from Beurim, but to discover a source which states that redemption is effective in deconsecrating Revai. So basically, Rabbi Zera could be wondering, how do we know it's possible to deconsecrate Revai by redeeming it with coins? All of this comes about from this baraisa of Beit Shammai, because Beit Shammai's point is that if the Revai is landing on the Shemitah year, right? If it was just talking about a normal year, then you could argue that perhaps there's no disagreement at all between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and they both have a Gezerah Shava, and you could add a wrinkle and say, oh well, but the difference is Beit Hillel has this, Halacha L'Moshe L'Sinai, that it's like that. Okay, but here's what makes it tricky. What makes it tricky is Beit Shammai comes along and puts in this baraisa that says no, that if it happens on the seventh year, if the fourth year fruit happens on the seventh year of the growing cycle, here's what happens. Now that makes it tricky, because we're not really sure and we're not really clear what on earth is Beit Shammai saying here. So that's what everybody here is scrambling to try to figure out, because it has a lot of implications. We're trying to unpack it, and nobody seems to be really sure which is which. Okay. The Gemara is going to now answer Rabbi Zera's question. Okay, it says, for the verse describes Revai as sanctified for songs of praise, Hilulim, and that's where we have Hallel from. So by replacing basically what they're going to be saying is they're going to be saying that by replacing the Hebrew letter He with the Hebrew letter Chet, we can expound it to read like this. It can say, sanctified for deconsecrations. In other words, instead of saying sanctified for songs of praise, Hilulim, we could say sanctified for deconsecrations, Chululim, with a Chet. And, the rabbis have a tradition that they do not refrain from making an exposition to explain something, simply to preserve the difference between a He, as in Hilulim, and a Chet, as in Chilulim. So so that could be one way to read it. In other words, they could say that if you're explaining a given verse and it requires a substitution from either He to a Chet, the rabbis don't hold back, and they proceed with that explanation. And they say that the He and the Chet are similar in form and pronunciation, and therefore they're going to be exchangeable, just for purposes of explanation. So in our case, this would allow the term Hilul to be expounded, as instead of with the He with the Chet, with Chilul, deconsecration, and that is going to teach that if a person chooses, he can eat the fruit in the fourth year outside Jerusalem. However, he must first redeem the fruit by deconsecrating it onto money. Here's what the Rosh says in Berachot 35a, okay, about this. He says that Rabbi Zera's question was not posed according to Beit Hillel, who derives that the deconsecration of Revai, comes from Meiser Sheni, and it seems that various Rishonim understand Beit Hillel to have expounded this teaching of Hilulim Kodesh, and so why is this teaching needed for Beit Hillel? So you can look at the Tosfot in Berachot 35a for an explanation on that. But this is getting, really, really intricate, and we're really trying to dig in and figure out what on earth is this implication of Beit Shammai, because really nobody is clear which is which. There are going to be three different opinions. Everybody agrees and everybody knows about the opinion for Beit Hillel. That's not a problem. But we always want to understand what is the minority view, and especially when the minority view is Beit Shammai. And how can you really have a deep understanding of Beit Hillel when you don't even know what Beit Shammai is arguing or saying or claiming? We're not really sure what the resolution is by Beit Hillel. We know what Beit Hillel is, we know what the halacha is, but we're not exactly sure what he's trying to refute, right? Because we're not sure what Beit Shammai is. And that's why we're spending the majority of chapter 7 trying to figure out what is Beit Shammai. What is the point of Beit Shammai? Because you have these great men. You have Rebbe here sitting there saying, oh, it's like this. You have Rabbi Yishmael coming and saying, no, it's going to be like that. Rabbi Yishmael didn't come up yet. And then you have Rabban Shimon Gamliel saying, no, it's like this. And there's 3 completely different opinions. So we really have 4 opinions of what's going on over here. Okay? 3 opinions of what Beit Shammai could be saying, and then you have Beit Hillel, which nobody disagrees about. So very, very technical. The Gemara now is going to cite 2 baraisas, one that proves the source of Beit Shammai's ruling, and the other that proves the source of Beit Hillel's ruling. So here's what these new baraisas say. Rabbi Ivu bar Nagri taught a baraisa of Rabbi Yishmael before Rabbi La. In the Bavli, it's Rabbi Illa. And the verse states, with regards to Meiser Sheni, here's what it says. It says, if a person shall redeem some of his Meiser Sheni, he shall add a fifth upon it. Shall add its fifth upon it. And this excludes the fruit of a 4th year sapling, upon which the owner is not obligated to add a fifth at redemption. So they're saying that this is the source of Beit Shammai's ruling about Revai from the law of adding a fifth. So here's what the Mara Fulda says. Mara Fulda is saying that Rabbi Yishmael is disputing both Rebbe and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and unlike Rebbe, he holds that Beit Shammai's ruling concerning Revai of all years, not just the Shemitah year, and unlike Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he does not say that Beit Shammai rejects the Gezerah Shava of holy and holy. And in Rabbi Yishmael's view, Beit Shammai might very well expound this Gezerah Shava. Nevertheless, they rule that there is no added fifth for Revai on account of the exclusionary verse that they just cited. Okay, so here comes the 3rd view of none other than Rabbi Yishmael, the great Tana. And so now you have a 3-way dispute, and it's going to be a real Gemara show here. So let's see how does this go. So here's the second baraisa. So also going to be from Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Ivu taught a baraisa of Rabbi Yishmael before Rabbi La, in which Rabbi Yishmael is going to explain the repetitive wording of the same verse. And the verse translates literally as, he redeems, he shall redeem. That, by the way, when you're going to literally read it, and you're going to literally translate it from the Torah, where it's saying, Ve'im, Ga'al, Yigal, where it's literally saying that, and if he redeems, he redeems. So the baraisa is going to be explaining, says the Gemara, there are 2 redemptions, both of the added fifth, and one for Meiser Sheni, and one for the fruit of the 4th year sapling. So that's a very big chiddush. So according to this interpretation, the verse is really teaching that both Meiser Sheni and Revai require an added fifth at redemption, and they could be saying that, hey, maybe this is the source of Beit Hillel's ruling for adding the fifth here. So these are big chiddushim, and who do we look to? Who do we need? We need the Vilna Goan for some help. So let's look at the Vilna Goan's book, and here's what the Vilna Goan explains about this. Vilna Goan says, according to Rabbi Yishmael, Beit Hillel does not derive the Gezerah Shava of holy and holy to teach an analogy between Meiser Sheni and Revai. So then what then is a source for the added fifth for redeeming Revai? it is this verse which teaches that the law of an added fifth for Meiser Sheni, and which speaks of two redemptions. The first redemption refers to Meiser Sheni, and the second of Revai, and thus one who redeems his own Revai produce must add a fifth of its value. So I want to point out that according to the Bavli in Kiddushin 54b, where the parallel is for this, by the way, the source over there for Beit Hillel's ruling is not the double mention of redemption that Rabbi Yishmael is putting in this verse, but only the Gezerah Shava that links between Meiser Sheni and Revai. So it teaches that just as Meiser Sheni is subject to the law of fifth and disposal, so too is Revai. But the Vilna Goan is maintaining that according to Rabbi Yishmael's teaching, Beit Hillel does not expound the Gezerah Shava between Meiser Sheni and Revai for this part, and this is because they're saying that Meiser Sheni, we're learning from Meiser Sheni that Revai is the property of the divine. So that's how the Vilna Goan is reading what Rabbi Yishmael is saying. Okay, the Vilna Goan is not saying that this is what the halacha is, and Rabbi Yishmael is not necessarily saying this is what the halacha is, and Rebbe is not necessarily saying this is what the halacha is, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is not necessarily saying this is what the halacha is. They're all trying to figure out, everybody here, including you and me, we're all trying to figure out what is Beit Shammai saying here. What are the implications of this? How do we understand it? How do we figure it out? So, according to what Rabbi Yishmael is saying, he's saying, no, don't look at this Gezerah Shava between Meiser Sheni and Revai for that. Just look at the redemption and look at Meiser Sheni. And in the where it's talking about Meiser Sheni, it says there's two redemptions. It literally reads, "He redeems, he shall redeem," and Rabbi Yishmael is saying that from this verse in Meiser Sheni, the two redemptions would be one is for Meiser Sheni and one is for Revai, and that's how he derives it. And then you could also say that, like what the Vilna Goan is pointing out, that the Gezerah Shava between Meiser Sheni and Revai, that's really not to get a halacha, but to maintain and to ensure that that there's some sanctity. Okay, so that's how the Vilna Goan is reading this statement by Rabbi Yishmael. Again, this is not the opinion of the Vilna Goan. We're just trying to figure out what is Beit Shammai saying, because these three ways to interpret it are all very valid and clear ways to try to read and understand what is being said here. We're just unsure. So let's continue. So the Gemara is going to now talk about a Mishnah which is going to connect back to Rebbe's interpretation of Beit Shammai's ruling. So now we're going back to Rebbe. Rebbe maintained that there is a Gezerah Shava, and that the Gezerah Shava that's coming here, and the reason that Beit Shammai is in this baraisa picking the Revai that lands on the Shemitah year, the fourth year produce of the vine that lands on the fourth year, is to show that it does accept the leniencies of Meiser Sheni, whereas according to how Rebbe or everybody is understanding Beit Hillel, that Revai and Meiser Sheni do have that same Gezerah Shava, but that there is no leniency for Revai. Okay, that no leniency for Revai is a Halacha L'Moshe L'Sinai. Okay, so let's get back to Rebbe's interpretation. Again, that's the point that it lands on the seventh year, and that there are going to be no leniencies that all the leniencies of that you have for Meiser Sheni, according to what Rebbe is interpreting that Beit Shammai is saying, is also going to be for Revai. So we learned in a Mishnah there in Trumos, which is going to be in basically he's going to be quoting from Trumos chapter 3, Halacha 9, and here's what the Mishnah says. It says, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Yudah says the produce of an idol worshiper is not subject to the law of a fourth-year vineyard, but the sages say the produce of an idol worshiper is subject to the law of a fourth-year vineyard. So the Gemara is going to comment on Rabbi Yudah's ruling, and Rabbi Lazar says like this, says, this is what the Mishnah is saying. An idol worshiper is altogether not subject to the law of a fourth-year vineyard, according to Rabbi Yudah, not only in Eretz Yisrael, but even in Syria. Now, the idol worshiper is exempt from Revai in Eretz Yisrael because an idol worshiper's ownership of the land of Israel exempts the produce from tithes, and by the way, other obligations, other agricultural obligations. But Syria is this weird place that, it was conquered by King David's army, and it was not a mandatory law war from the Bible, from the Torah, but it was really like an elective war. And there's a debate whether the land of Syria should have the halachic status of Eretz Yisrael or not. So over there, they're saying that, and a lot of these rules are going to be in Syria derabanan, and very lenient. It's always going to take leniency. So basically, they're saying that an idol worshiper. Here's what the Marafula says. It's basically saying that an idol worshiper in Syria is exempt from Revai because there is no requirement of Revai in Syria altogether, and neither Jews nor idol worshippers have to do it. And according to Rabbi Yudah, any Revai fruit grown in Syria need not be eaten in Jerusalem or redeemed, and need not be disposed of in the 4th and 7th year of the Shemitah cycle. Although Rabbi Yudah mentions only idol worshippers explicitly, his exemption applies to both idol worshippers and Jews. So, the reason that Rabbi Yudah is speaking only with idol worshippers, is that his ruling concerns both Eretz Yisrael and Syria, and only an idol worshipper is exempt in Eretz Yisrael, but in Syria, the exemption for Revai, both between an idol worshiper and a Jew, is going to be universal. So Mara Fulda says, without Rabbi Lazar's comment, one might assume that the point of Rabbi Yudah's ruling is to exclude the produce of an idol worshiper in Eretz Yisrael from Revai. Rabbi Lazar is informing us that, in fact, Rabbi Yudah's ruling is stated also with respect to Syria, and is a general exemption that applies equally to Jews and idol worshippers. So the Gemara is going to explain the source of this ruling, and here's how the Gemara continues. It says, Rabbi Bivi stated before Rabbi Zera in the name of Rabbi Lazar that Rabbi Yudah's ruling follows the view of Beit Shammai as per the understanding of Rebbe, just as Beit Shammai says, according to Rebbe, that the rabbis derived the law of a fourth-year sapling from none other than the law of Meiser Sheni, and therefore, just as you say that there is no requirement of Meiser Sheni, says the Gemara, during the Shemitah year, in the same way, there is no requirement for a fourth-year sapling during the Shemitah year. The Gemara continues and says, so too does Rabbi Yudah say, the law of a fourth-year sapling is derived from none other than the law of Meiser Sheni. And the Gemara continues and says, therefore, just as you say there's no requirement for Meiser Sheni in Syria, in the same way, there should be no requirement of a fourth-year sapling in Syria. So basically, Rabbi Bivi is arguing that Rabbi Yudah follows Beit Shammai's view of the analogy between Meiser Sheni and Revai, and according to Beit Shammai, we learned that the absence of Meiser Sheni during the Shemitah year, that during the Shemitah, that the Revai of Shemitah is exempt from a fifth and disposal. So also according to Rabbi Yudah, we're learning that the absence of Meiser Sheni in Syria, the produce of Syria, is going to be also exempt from Meiser Sheni. So here's how the Rambam interprets part of this. By biblical law, Rambam commentary in the Mishnah, Trumos, chapter 1, halacha 4. By biblical law, there's no Meiser obligation in Syria, and as there's no as it is not regarded as part of Eretz Yisrael. And although the rabbis did enact a decree obligating the produce of Syria and Truma and Meiser, their decree did not include Meiser Sheni on account of the scriptural analogy between Meiser Sheni and the Bachor, the firstborn animal. So this teaches us, says the Rambam, that just as one does not offer a Bachor animal from outside of Eretz Yisrael, so too with Meiser Sheni. And because basically the scriptures specifically excluding Meiser Sheni, the rabbis did not want to impose their decree, with regards to Meiser Sheni. So if, so basically, there's no requirement of Meiser Sheni in Syria at all, not under biblical law and also not under rabbinic law. So what's going on here? So basically, Rabbi Bivi is drawing a comparison between Rabbi Yudah's ruling on Revai in Syria and Beit Shammai's ruling on Revai during the Shemitah. And these rulings are going to be similar because both the Gezerah Shava between Meiser Sheni and Revai has holy and holy. And that's going to teach that, an unlimited comparison between the two laws. And that is that the Gezerah Shava is going to extend to Revai, not only the rules that relate directly to the sanctity of Meiser Sheni, but also to those that are not connected to sanctity, like Shemitah, or the location, like Syria. Syria is not going to have Meiser Sheni because there's no sanctity to the land. So, in the view of Beit Shammai, according to how Rabbi Yudah is doing this and reading this, comparison between Meiser Sheni and Revai is total, and every aspect of the law of Meiser Sheni is extended to Revai. In other words, it's just like what we said. We're saying that by Beit Shammai talking about the fourth year fruit landing on the Shemitah year, basically what's happening is this. They're saying that it's total, okay? The Gezerah Shava is total. Holy and holy over here, everything dealing with all the laws and exemptions on Meiser Sheni is also going to be on Revai. What are the other exemptions? Okay, also, if it's grown on land that doesn't have sanctity, like in Syria, then also there's no Meiser Sheni, there's also going to be no Revai. And that's why they're saying that. They're saying that, by putting it on a Gezerah Shava and by saying that, hey, if it lands on the Shemitah year, that, it doesn't have sanctity. The fourth year produce doesn't have sanctity because the law of the Shemitah applies. And so it's not your produce. So it doesn't have sanctity. And just like you don't separate out Meiser Sheni from Shvius produce, you don't separate out anything for the Revai as well. That's why he's putting it out. So basically, it comes back to this statement by Rebbe, where they're saying that according to what Beit Shammai is saying, that it has all of the rules of Revai and Meiser Sheni. They're totally connected, and whatever leniencies or strictures strictnesses that you have on Meiser Sheni, or leniencies on Meiser Sheni, you're also going to have for Revai, and that's what the halacha is going to be. But Beit Shammai is going to say, no, it only has, a couple of these points, but it doesn't have the leniencies, and so, it's going to be, and we know that from Halacha L'Moshe L'Sinai. So now the Gemara is going to try to differentiate between Beit Shammai and Rabbi Yudah, because again, we're not saying that Rabbi Yudah's opinion is also Beit Shammai's opinion. We're only doing an exercise where we're trying to understand what does Beit Shammai say. Okay, so the Gemara now is going to differentiate between what does Beit Shammai believe and what does Rabbi Yudah believe. Right? This is only a statement that says that, hey, Rabbi Yudah could be saying this is what Beit Shammai is saying. But we're going to go look at, the Gemara is going to go pull up an example of what Rabbi Yudah actually says, which is different from what Beit Shammai says. So you got to keep this in mind, okay? Again, this is not Rebbe's ruling. Rebbe might have a different opinion, okay? This is what Rebbe's saying that Beit Shammai is saying. And this is not Rabbi Yudah's ruling. This is what Rabbi Yudah is saying, Beit Shammai is saying. Now we're going to differentiate and see what does Rabbi Yudah actually say. What does he actually mean? So Rabbi Zera says to Rabbi Bibi, but we see what Beit Shammai actually said. And it will be apparent that we do not equate their ruling with that of Rabbi Yudah. So Gemara continues, says, for Beit Shammai said only that Revai of the Shemitah year is not subject to the law of an added fifth or to the law of disposal. Gemara continues, it says, but with regard to other aspects of Revai, like the basic sanctity, or that, because it has this sanctity, it has to be eaten in Jerusalem, and because it has this essential inner sanctity that it has to be redeemed. Okay, again, not at the same level of sanctity at Meiser Sheni, but it has some sanctity. Okay, and so the Gemara continues, says Beit Shammai also agrees that Revai of the Shemitah year is subject to these requirements. So according to Beit Shammai, the comparison of Meiser Sheni does not entirely negate the sanctity of Revai. It merely limits it in certain respects. So in contrast to, what Rabbi Yudah's actual ruling is, okay? Rabbi Yudah's actual ruling is this. Gemara says, Rabbi Yudah says an idol worshiper is not subject to the law of a fourth-year vineyard in Syria, meaning that the produce of Syria is entirely without Revai sanctity. So according to Rabbi Yudah's law of Revai being completely negated in Syria, it is clear in his ruling that his ruling does not actually derive from Beit Shammai. Rather, Rabbi Yudah is going to be ruling on another source, but they're only trying to go through and pick out what is the point of Beit Shammai. Now, Mara Fulda says like this, says that Rabbi Zera maintains that although the Gezerah Shava does extend even to some matters of time and place, according to Beit Shammai, as explained by Rebbe, it cannot serve to entirely negate the law of Revai in a particular place or time. Therefore, it cannot tell us that there is altogether no obligation of Revai in Syria. And the ruling of Rebbe in no way indicates otherwise, for Rebbe did not say that according to Beit Shammai there is no Revai during Shemitah at all, but only that Revai of Shemitah is exempt from the laws of a fifth and disposal. So that's really interesting. So now the Gemara is gonna, and then we're gonna just finish up the sugya, and then we'll be done for the day, and then we'll finish up the third part of the shiur on chapter 7, halacha 5 tomorrow. So the Gemara is now going to question Rebbe's interpretation of Beit Shammai's ruling. Okay, again, today's day is only trying to figure out what Beit Shammai is saying. Everybody's arguing what Beit Shammai is saying. It's just proved from what we just looked at that that's not even necessarily their own opinion, right? Rabbi Yudah doesn't have the opinion of Beit Shammai, but Rabbi Yudah is trying to explain what is Beit Shammai saying. Rebbe's trying to say, what is Beit Shammai saying? And Rabbi Yishmael is also trying to say, well, what is Beit Shammai saying? Everybody's trying to figure out what he's saying. And, now he's going to question Rebbe's interpretation of what Beit Shammai is saying. So Shmuel bar Abba asked in the Gemara, behold, according to Rebbe, Beit Shammai said that the rabbis derived the law of a fourth-year sapling from none other than the law of Meiser Sheni. And Beit Shammai rules that just as you say there's no requirement of Meiser Sheni during the Shemitah year, in the same way there's no requirement of a fourth-year sapling during the Shemitah year. And so the Gemara now is going to ask a question. Okay, it's going to question this. It says, but in the same way, one could argue that in the third year and the sixth year of the Shemitah cycle 2, since there is no requirement of Meiser Sheni during those years, there should be no requirement of a fourth-year sapling either during those years. So, in fact, the law of Revai does apply during the third and sixth year. So this seems, it would seem maybe this contradicts Rebbe's understanding of Beit Shammai's ruling. So, by the way, in the third and sixth year, in the Shemitah cycle, the Meiser Sheni gets replaced with Meiser Ni. That's what they're talking about, okay? And here's what the Rosh Hashanah says about what this Gemara is saying, okay? Possible, way to understand this, okay? Presumably, the Gemara simply means that the requirements of the fifth and the disposal should not apply in these years when you have Meiser Ni, when Meiser Sheni is replaced by Meiser Ni, just as they do not apply during the Shemitah year, according to Rebbe. So the essential sanctity of Revai is not being called into question because it is derived from Beurim, whose laws is in force. You have Beurim in the third and sixth year. So, one way to understand it is that, the way, Rabbi Bivi is understanding, Beit Shammai could be that, the comparison between Meiser Sheni and Revai is total. That's one way to read it. And just as, you don't have Meiser Sheni during a Shemitah, so too, there's not going to be Revai during, the Shemitah. And not only with regards to the laws of the fifth and disposal, but also with regard to the essential sanctity of Revai. In other words, during the Shemitah year, the fourth year fruit of a tree, is entirely without sanctity according to Beit Shammai, and does not need to be taken to Jerusalem or redeemed. So Rabbi Bivi could explain that Rabbi Yehuda also explains the Gezer Shava as an unlimited comparison between Meiser Sheni and Revai. And just as there's no Meiser Sheni whatsoever in Syria, there's also no Revai there. So this is trying to figure out what exactly is being said. And now the Gemara is going to resolve the difficulty by differentiating between the third and sixth years of the cycle of the Shemitah year itself with regards to Meiser Sheni being replaced with Meiser Ani. Rabbi Yossi says, with regards to the third and sixth year of the Shemitah cycle, even though there's no requirement of Meiser Sheni in those years, there is a requirement of Meiser Ani in those years. And because Meiser requirements remain, the produce of those years remain subject to the law of Revai. And so Gemara continues and says, in the Shemitah year, by contrast, there is no requirement of Meiser altogether, and therefore the produce of that year is exempt from the law of Revai. So Mara Fulda is going to explain it to us, and then we'll look at the Vilna Goan, and we'll finish for the day. Mara Fulda says, the Gemara answers that in the third and sixth year, one substitutes Meiser Ani for Meiser Sheni, and because a replacement for Meiser Sheni exists in those years, the mitzvah of Revai too, which is compared to Meiser Sheni, also exists as well. And in the Shemitah year, there is no substitute for Meiser Sheni, and therefore, inasmuch as Revai is derived from Meiser Sheni, there is no possibility of Revai either in the Shemitah year. So basically what they're saying is no, the sanctity doesn't go away on the third and sixth year because you're just replacing one for the other. But when do you have neither Meiser Ani or Meiser Sheni? That's the Shemitah year, and that's why they're picking that baraisa that talks about the Shemitah year, because that, there's no substitute. And so, now, just like you have no Meiser Sheni in the produce from the seventh year crop, also, and it's, ownerless and everything else, same too, you don't have these requirements on Revai. So just like there's going to be no sanctity for a Meiser Sheni crop, because there is no Meiser Sheni crop on the seventh year, so too there's going to be really no Revai crop, and there's no sanctity to that either. So you don't have to worry about taking these things out. That's one way to do it. Vilna Goan says like this, the Gezer Shava to Meiser Sheni teaches that from a legal standpoint, Revai is a form of Meiser, and therefore in the third and sixth years, when the obligations of Meiser are in force, the obligation of Revai is also in force, and the Shemitah year, when there is no Meiser obligation at all, there is no Revai obligation either. So that can be another look at what what's going on here for this. So look, this is important stuff. Where somebody can say, wait a second, I don't have a vineyard. Why do I care? So the Brisker Rebbe said that he wanted his Talmudim to sit and to learn the Kodshim Gemaras. Nobody really studies them, and he was saying that from a sugya from another Gemara, that if you're working on these Gemaras, it's like you're doing them. And so even if you don't have a vineyard in Eretz Yisrael, today it's like you're doing the mitzvah of Revai because you're learning about the laws and details. And so the Chofetz Chaim says that, and the Gemara says that, and the Brisker Rebbe says that. So even though you're learning these obscure things that are hard to do or not done, or you don't have a vineyard in Eretz Yisrael, that it's like you're doing it. So it's worth doing, and you're getting merit in Shemayim like you're doing this mitzvah. Have a great day.